Roswell, Alien Interview, Chapter 9, A Timeline of Events. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, Personal Note. For this interview I took written notes because Errol gave me a lot of dates and names that I couldn't possibly remember without writing them down. I didn't usually take notes, but during this lesson I thought it was important to get the information exactly as she gave it to me. However, I discovered that my note-taking made it much more difficult for me to focus on receiving the communication from Errol. I was sometimes so distracted by my own writing that I lost the train of her thought, so I had to ask her to repeat herself several times. Errol continued to stay in communication with the communications officer on the asteroid belt station, from which she received much of this information. Since Errol was an officer, pilot, and engineer of the domain, and not a historian, she had to get this information from records of reconnaissance missions conducted by other officers of the Domain Expeditionary Force. Official transcript of interview, top secret. The actual history of Earth is very bizarre. It's so nonsensical that it is incredible to anyone on Earth who attempts to investigate it. A myriad of vital information is missing from it. A huge conglomeration of non sequitur relics and mythology has been arbitrarily introduced into it. The volatile nature of the Earth itself cyclically covers, drowns, mixes, and shreds physical evidence. These factors, combined with amnesia, post-hypnotic suggestions, false facades, and cover manipulation, make a reconstruction of the factual origins and history of Earth civilizations virtually indecipherable. Any investigator, no matter how brilliant, is doomed to wallow in a quagmire of inconclusive assumptions, unworkable hypotheses, and perpetual mystery. Since the domain does not suffer these afflictions, having the advantage of memory, longevity, and an exterior point of view, I will add some clarification to your fragmentary knowledge of the history of Earth. These are some of the dates and events that are not mentioned in Earth history textbooks. These dates are significant because they provide some information concerning the influences of the old empire and of the domain on Earth. Although I have attended several briefings by our mission control personnel on the general background of the Earth within the past few hundred years, I will rely principally on data gathered from records captured after our invasion of the old Empire planetary headquarters. Since that time, the Domain Expeditionary Force has tracked the general progress of events on Earth. As I mentioned, in some cases the domain has chosen to intervene in certain affairs on Earth in order to ensure the success of our long-term expansion plans. Although the domain has no interest in Earth per se, or the population of Isbys on this planet, it does serve our interests to ensure that the resources of Earth are not destroyed or spoiled. To that end, certain officers of the domain have been sent to Earth on reconnaissance missions from time to time to gather information. However, the following dates and events have been extrapolated from the accumulated information in the data files of the domain, at least those that are accessible to me through the Space Station Communications Center. 208,000 BCE. The establishment of the old empire, whose headquarters were located near one of the tail stars of the Ursa Major Big Dipper constellation of this galaxy. The old Empire invasion force conquered the area with nuclear weapons sometime earlier. After the radioactivity subsided and the cleanup and restoration were completed, it received the immigration of beings from another galaxy into this galaxy. Those beings set up a society that kept going until about 10,000 years ago, when it was superseded by the domain. Very recently, Earth civilization has come to resemble aspects of that civilization, now that it has fallen out of its immediate control. In particular, the appearance and technology of transportation, such as planes, trains, ships, fire engines, and automobiles, as well as what you consider to be modern or futuristic architecture, which emulate the design of buildings in the major cities of the old empire. Before 75,000 BCE, the domain records contain very little information about the civilizations on the continental landmasses of Atlanta and Lemur, except to note that they did coexist on Earth at more or less the same time. Apparently both civilizations were founded by remnants of electronic space opera cultures who fled from their native planetary systems to escape political or religious persecution. The domain knows that a long-standing edict of the old empire prohibits unauthorized colonization of planets. Therefore, it is possible that their destruction was caused by police or military forces who pursued the colonists as criminals and destroyed them. Although this seems a likely supposition, no conclusive evidence exists that explains the complete destruction and disappearance of two entire electronic civilizations. Another possibility is that a massive submarine volcanic eruption in the region of Lake Toba in Sumatra and Mount Krakatoa in Java caused the destruction of Lemur. The floodwaters caused by the eruption overwhelmed all the land masses, including the highest mountains. Survivors of the destruction of the civilization, the Lemurians, are the earliest ancestors of the Chinese. Australia and the ocean areas to the north were the center of the Lemurian civilization and are the source of the Oriental races. Both civilizations possessed electronics, flight, and similar technologies of space opera cultures. Apparently, the volcanic eruption expelled such a significant mass of molten rock that the resulting vacuum beneath the crust of Earth caused great areas of the land masses to sink below the oceans. The continental areas occupied by both civilizations were covered with volcanic matter and then submerged, leaving very little evidence that they ever existed except for legends of a global flood which prevail in every culture of the earth, and for survivors who are the genus of the Oriental races and cultures. That kind of colossal volcanic explosion fills the stratosphere with toxic gases which are carried around the whole planet. The usual refuse of these volcanic eruptions can easily cause a rain that lasts 40 days and 40 nights due to atmospheric pollution, as well as an extensive period during which radiation from the sun is deflected back into space and causes global cooling. Certainly such an event would cause an ice age, extinctions of life forms, and many other relatively long-term changes lasting thousands of years. Due to the myriad types of naturally occurring global cataclysmic events which are indigenous to Earth, it is not a suitable planet for habitation by ISBs. In addition, there have been occasional global cataclysms caused by ISBs, such as the one that destroyed the dinosaurs more than 70 million years ago. That destruction was caused by an intergalactic warfare, during which time Earth and many other neighboring moons and planets were bombarded by atomic weapons. Atomic explosions cause atmospheric fallout much like that of volcanic eruptions. Most of the planets in this sector of the galaxy have been uninhabitable deserts since then. Earth is undesirable for many other reasons: heavy gravity and dense atmosphere, floods, earthquakes, volcanoes, polar shifts, continental drift, meteor impacts, atmospheric and climatic changes, to name a few. What kind of lasting civilization could any sophisticated culture propose to develop in such an environment? In addition, Earth is a small planet of a rim star of a galaxy. This makes Earth very isolated geographically from the more concentrated planetary civilizations which exist toward the center of the galaxy. These obvious facts have made Earth suitable for use only as a zoological or botanical garden, or for its current use as a prison, but not much else. Before 30,000 years BCE, Earth started being used as a dumping ground and prison for ISBs who were judged untouchable, meaning criminal or nonconformists. ISBs were captured, encapsulated in electronic traps, and transported to Earth from various parts of the old empire. Underground amnesia stations were set up on Mars and on Earth in the Rwenzori Mountains in Africa, in the Pyrenees Mountains of Portugal, and in steppes of Mongolia. These electronic monitoring points create force screens designed to detect and capture ISBs when the ISB departs the body at death. ISBs are brainwashed using extreme electronic force in order to maintain Earth's population in a state of perpetual amnesia. Further population controls are installed through the use of long-range electronic thought control mechanisms. These stations are still in operation, and they are extremely difficult to attack or destroy, even for the domain, which will not maintain a significant military force in this area until a later date. The pyramid civilizations were intentionally created as a part of the ISB prison system on Earth. The pyramid is alleged to be the symbol for wisdom. However, the wisdom of the old empire on planet Earth is intended to operate as part of the elaborate amnesia trap consisting of mass, meaning, and mystery. These are opposite to the qualities of an immortal spiritual being which has no mass or meaning. An ISB is solely because it thinks that it is. Mass represents the physical universe, including objects such as stars, planets, gases, liquids, energy particles, and teacups. The pyramids were very, very solid objects, as were all the structures created by the old empire. Heavy, massive, dense, solid objects create the illusion of eternity. Dead bodies wrapped in linen, soaked in resin, placed inside engraved golden coffins, and entombed with earthly possessions amid cryptic symbols create an illusion of eternal life. However, dense, heavy physical universe symbols are the exact opposite of an ISB. An ISB has no mass or time. Objects do not endure forever. An ISB is forever. Meaning. False meanings prevent knowledge of the truth. The pyramid cultures of Earth are a fabricated illusion. They are nothing more than false civilizations contrived by the old empire, mystery cult, called the Brothers of the Serpent. False meanings were invented to create the illusion of a false society to further reinforce the amnesia mechanism among the inmates in the Earth prison system. Mystery is built of lies and half-truths. Lies cause persistence because they alter facts which are comprised of exact dates, places, and events. When truth is known, a lie no longer persists. If the exact truth is revealed, it is no longer a mystery. All of the pyramid civilizations of Earth were carefully contrived of layer upon layer of lies skillfully combined with a few truths. The priest cult of the old empire combined sophisticated mathematics and space opera technology with their theatrical metaphors and symbolism. All of these are complete fabrications of truth baited with the allure of aesthetics and mystery. The intricate rituals, astronomical alignments, secret rites, massive monuments, marvelous architecture, artistically rendered hieroglyphs, and man-animal gods were designed to create an unsolvable mystery for the ISB prison population on Earth. The mystery diverts attention away from the truth that ISBs have been captured, given amnesia, and imprisoned on a planet far, far away from their home. The truth is that every single ISB on Earth came to Earth from some other planetary system. Not one person on Earth is a native inhabitant. Human beings did not evolve on Earth. In the past, Egyptian society was run by the prison administrators or priests, who in turn manipulated a pharaoh, controlled the treasury, and kept the inmate population enslaved physically and spiritually. In modern times, the priests have changed, but the function is the same. However, now the priests are prisoners too. Mystery reinforces the walls of the prison. The old empire feared that the ISBs on Earth might regain their memory. Therefore, one of the primary functions of the old empire priesthood is to prevent ISBs on Earth from remembering who they really are, how they came to Earth, where they came from. The old empire operators of the prison system and their superiors do not want ISBs to remember who murdered them, captured them, stole all of their possessions, sent them to Earth, gave them amnesia, and condemned them to eternal imprisonment. Imagine what would happen if all the inmates in the prison suddenly remembered that they have the right to be free. What if they suddenly realized that they have been falsely imprisoned and rise up as one against the guards? They are afraid to reveal anything that looks like the civilization of the inmates' home planets. A body, a piece of clothing, a symbol, a spaceship, an advanced electronics device, or any other remnant of civilization from a home planet could remind a being and rekindle his memory. Sophisticated technologies of entrapment and enslavement, which were developed over millions of years in the old empire, have been applied to the ISBs on Earth with the intention to create a false facade for the prison. These facades were installed on Earth in totality all at once. Every piece is a fully integrated part of the prison system. This includes a religion of mumbo-jumbo doublespeak. Every pyramid civilization uses this as part of a control mechanism to keep the population enslaved by force, by fear, and by ignorance. This includes a religion of mumbo-jumbo doublespeak. Every pyramid civilization uses this as part of a control mechanism to keep the population enslaved by force, by fear, and by ignorance. The indecipherable muddle of irrelevant information, geometric designs, mathematical calculation, astronomical alignments are part of the false spirituality based on solid objects rather than immortal spirits, in order to confuse and disorient the ISBs on Earth. When the body of a person died, they were buried with their earthly possessions, including their former body wrapped in linen, to sustain their soul, or ka, after death. An ISB does not have a soul. An ISB is a soul. On the home planet of an ISB, their material possessions were not lost, stolen, or forgotten when the being died or left the body. An ISB could return and claim the possessions. However, if the ISB has amnesia, they will not remember that they had any possession. So governments, insurance companies, bankers, family members, and other vultures can pick their possessions clean without fear of retribution from the deceased. The only reason for these false meanings is to instill the idea that an Isby is not a spirit but a physical object. This is a lie. This is a trap for an Isby. Countless people have spent endless hours attempting to solve the jigsaw puzzle of Egypt and other old empire civilizations. They are puzzles made of pieces that do not fit. A question states its own answer. What is the mystery of Egypt and other pyramid cultures? Mystery. Circa 15,000 BCE. The old empire forces supervised the construction of hydraulic mining operations in the Andes Mountains in present-day Bolivia near Lake Titicaca, Lake of 10 Stones, at Tiwanaku, including construction of the massive stone complex of carved stone buildings known as Kalasasaya and its Gate of the Sun at the elevation of nearly 14,000 feet. 11,600 BCE. The polar axis of Earth shifted. The polar axis of Earth shifted to a sea area. The last ice age came to an end abruptly as the polar ice caps melted and the level of the ocean rose to submerge large sections of the land masses of Earth. The last remaining vestiges of Atlantis and Lemuria were covered by water. Massive extinctions of animals occurred in the Americas, Australia, and the Arctic regions due to the shift of the poles. 10,450 BCE. Plans were made by the old empire Isby called Thoth for construction of a great pyramid of Giza. The 4 air shafts of the pyramid point precisely to key stars in the old empire as seen from Giza this year. The alignment of the pyramids of Giza on the ground matches perfectly the alignment of the constellation of Orion as seen in the sky from Giza relative to the Nile as the earthly representation of the Milky Way in the sky. 10,400 BCE. According to the Earth historian Herodotus, records from the ruined civilizations of Atlantis, containing electronic technology and other technology of that society, were buried in a vault beneath the paws of the Sphinx. The Greek historian wrote that he was told about this by some of his friends who were priests of Anu, the Sumerian god, at the Egyptian city of Heliopolis. However, it is highly unlikely that any traces of an electronic civilization would be allowed to be left intact on Earth by the old empire prison system administrators. 8,212 BCE. The Veda or Vedic hymns are a set of religious hymns that were introduced to the societies of Earth. They came forward in spoken tradition, memorized from generation to generation. The hymn to the Dawn Child includes an idea called the cycle of the physical universe, the creation, growth, conservation, decay, and death, or destruction of energy and matter in a space. These cycles produce time. The same set of hymns describes the theory of evolution. Here is a tremendous body of knowledge which contains a great deal of spiritual truth. Unfortunately, it has been incorrectly evaluated by humans and altered with lies and reversals of fact by priests, which are a booby trap to prevent anyone from using the wisdom to discover a way to escape from the prison planet. 8050 BCE. Destruction of the old empire home planet government in this galaxy. This was the end of the old empire as a political entity in the galaxy. However, the vast size of the old empire will take many thousands of years for the domain to conquer completely. The inertia of the political, economic, and cultural systems of the old empire will remain in place for some time to come. However, remnants of the old empire space fleet in the solar system of Earth were finally destroyed in 1230 AD. In addition to operatives of the old empire who run the Earth prison operation, there were other beings from the old empire who came to Earth. Since Earth was no longer under the control of the old empire after their defeat by the domain forces, there was no police force to control military renegades, space pirates, miners, merchants, and entrepreneurs who came to Earth to exploit the resources of the planet for personal gain and many other nefarious reasons. For example, the history of the Earth according to the Jewish people describes the Nephilim. Chapter 6 of the book of Genesis describes the origin of Nephilim. Now it came about, when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they choose. The Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. The ancient Jewish people who wrote the history book called the Old Testament were slaves, herders, and gatherers. Any modern technology, even a simple flashlight, would seem astounding and miraculous to them. They attributed any unexplainable phenomenon to technology of the workings of a god. Unfortunately, this behavior is universal among all ISBEs who have been given amnesia and cannot remember their own experiences, training, technology, personality, or identity. Obviously, if these were men and they mated with Earth women, they were not sons of God. They were ISBEs who inhabited biological bodies in order to take advantage of the political situation in the old empire, or simply to indulge in physical sensation. They set up small colonies of their own on Earth beyond the reach of the police and tax authorities. Coincidentally, one of the most serious crimes an ISBE could commit in the old empire was to violate income tax regulations. Income taxes were used as a slavery mechanism and a punishment in the old empire. The slightest error in a tax report made an ISBE untouchable, followed by imprisonment on Earth. 6750 BCE. Other pyramid civilizations were set up by the old empire on Earth. These were established in Babylon, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica. The Mesopotamian area provided service facilities, communication stations, spaceports, and stone quarry operations for these false civilizations. Ptah was the name given to the first in a succession of administrators from the old empire who represented themselves to Earth population as divine rulers. Ptah's importance may be understood when one learns that the word Egypt is a Greek corruption of the phrase Het-Ka Ptah, or House of the Spirit of Ptah. Ptah was nicknamed the Developer. He was a construction engineer. His high priest was given the title Great Leader of Craftsmen. Ptah was also the god of reincarnation in Egypt. He originated the opening of the mouth ceremony, which was performed by priests at funerals to release souls from their corpses. Of course, when the souls were released, they were captured, given amnesia, and returned to Earth again. The so-called divine rulers who followed Ptah on Earth were called Neter, meaning guardians or watchers by the Egyptians. Their symbol was the serpent, or dragon, which represented a secret priesthood of the old empire called the Brothers of the Serpent. Old empire engineers used cutting tools of highly concentrated light waves to quickly carve and excavate stone blocks. They also used force fields and spacecraft to lift and transport blocks of stone weighing hundreds or thousands of tons each. The placement on the ground of some of these structures will be found to have geodesic or astronomical significance relative to various stars in this galactic region. The buildings are crude and impractical compared to building standards on most planets. As an engineer of the domain, I can attest that makeshift structures like these would never pass inspection on a planet in the domain. Stone blocks such as those used in pyramid civilizations can still be seen, partially excavated in the stone quarries in the Middle East and elsewhere. Most of the structures were hastily built props, much like the false facades of the Western town on a set of a motion picture. They appear to be real and to have some use or value. However, they have no value. They have no useful purpose. The pyramids and all of the other stone monuments erected by the old empire could be called mystery monuments. For what reason would anyone waste so many resources to construct so many useless buildings, to create a mysterious illusion? The fact of the matter is that each one of the divine rulers were ISBEs who served as operatives of the old empire. They were certainly not divine, although they were ISBEs. 6248 BCE. The beginning of active warfare between the Domain Space Command and the surviving remnants of the old Empire space fleet in this solar system that lasted nearly 7,500 years. It began when an installation was established in the Himalaya Mountains by a battalion of the 3,000 officers and crew members of the Domain Expeditionary Force. The installation was not fortified, as the Domain was not aware that the old Empire maintained Earth as a prison planet. The Domain installation was attacked and destroyed by space forces of the old Empire, who continued to operate in the solar system of Earth. ISBEs of the Domain Battalion were captured, taken to Mars, given amnesia, and sent back to Earth to inhabit human biological bodies. They are still on Earth. 5965 BCE. Investigations into the disappearance of Domain forces in this solar system led to the discovery of old Empire bases on Mars and elsewhere. The Domain took over the planet Venus as a defensive position against the space forces of the old Empire. The Domain Expeditionary Force also monitors life forms on Venus, which has a very dense, hot, heavy atmosphere of sulfuric acid clouds. There are few life forms on Earth that can endure an atmospheric environment like Venus. The domain also established secret installations or space stations in the Earth's solar system. This solar system has a planet that is broken up, the asteroid belt. It provides a very useful low-gravity platform for takeoff and landing of spacecraft. It is used as a galactic jump between the Milky Way and adjoining galaxies. There aren't any planets at this end of the galaxy that can serve as a good galactic entering spot for incoming transport and other ships. But this broken-up planet makes a very ideal space station. As a result of our war against the old empire, this area of the solar system is now a valuable possession of the domain. 3450 to 3100 BCE. The intervention into the affairs of Earth by the old empire operatives, or divine gods, was disrupted at this time by the domain forces. They were forced to replace themselves with human rulers. The first dynasty of human pharaohs, who united Upper and Lower Egypt, began with the rule of a pharaoh who coincidentally was named Men. He established the capital city called Men-Nefer, the beauty of men, in Egypt. This started the first succession of 10 human pharaohs and a period of 350 years of chaos that followed in the administrative ranks of the old empire. 3200 BCE. As I mentioned earlier, Earth was under attack between the domain and the old empire forces during this period. Of course, this does not make any sense to archaeologists or historians on Earth, because the Egyptian period is a space opera era period. Since Earth historians have amnesia, they assume that this was only a religious period. Further, because the technology and civilizations installed on Earth during this period were pre-packaged, they did not evolve on Earth. Of course, there is no evidence anywhere on Earth of an evolutionary transition which resulted in sophisticated mathematics, language, writing, religion, architecture, cultural traditions in Egypt, or any of the pyramid civilizations. These cultures, complete with all the details of racial body types, hairstyles, facial makeup, rituals, moral codes, and so forth, just appeared as complete integrated packages. The physical evidence suggests that all evidence of the intervention of the domain or the old empire forces or any other extraterrestrial activity has been carefully cleaned up so as not to create suspicion. The old empire force does not want the Isbis of Earth to suspect that they have been captured, transplanted to Earth, and brainwashed. So Earth historians continue to assume that Egyptian priests were not supposed to have ray guns or other technology of the old empire, and they suppose that there was nothing going on Earth except some priests walking around saying Amen, which the Christians still say. (3172 BCE). Layout of the astronomical grid that joins the key mining sites and astronomical buildings of the gods in the Andes Mountains, such as Tiwanaku, Cusco, Quito, the cities of Ollantaytambo, Machu Picchu, and Pachacamac, for the mining of rare metals, including tin for use in making bronze. Metals were the property of the gods, of course. A great variety of entrepreneurial mining was done on Earth at that time, due to the war between the old empire force and the domain. These miners did carve a few sculptures of themselves. They were seen wearing mining helmets. The Ponce Stela sculpture in the sunken courtyard of the Kalasasaya temple is a crude rendering of a stone worker using an electronic light wave emitting stone cutter and carving tools held in a holster. The old empire has also maintained mining operations on planets throughout the galaxy for a very long time. The mineral resources of Earth are now a property of the domain. 2450 BCE, the Great Pyramid and complex of Pyramid near Cairo were completed. An inscription created by the old empire administrators can be seen in the so-called pyramid texts. The texts say that the pyramid was built under the direction of Thoth, son of Ptah. Of course, there was never a king buried in the chamber, since the pyramids were never intended to be used as a burial chamber. The Great Pyramid was located precisely at the exact center of all land masses of Earth, as viewed from space. Obviously, such precise measurements require aerial perspective and a view of the land masses of Earth from space. Purely mathematical calculations of the geodetic center of the continents of Earth could not be made otherwise. Shafts were constructed inside the pyramid to align the configuration of stars in the constellation of Orion, Canis Majora, and specifically Sirius. The shafts are also aligned to the Big Dipper, where the home planet of the old empire existed. Also Aenetak, Alpha Draconis, and Beta Ursa Minor. These stars are each one of the key systems in the old empire from which Isbis were brought to Earth and dumped as unwanted merchandise. The configuration of all the pyramids of the Giza Plateau was intended to create a mirror image on Earth of the solar system and certain constellations within the old empire. 2181 BCE. Min became the god of fertility in Egypt. The Isbi, also known as Pan, was also a Greek god. Min, or Pan, was an Isbi who somehow managed to escape from the old empire amnesia system. 2160 to 2040 BCE. One of the results of the intensifying battle between the domain forces and the old empire forces was that the control of the divine rulers was broken at this time. They finally left Egypt and returned to the heavens, so to speak, in defeat. Human beings took over the ruling role as pharaohs. The first human pharaoh moved the capital city of Egypt from Memphis to Heracleopolis, 1500 BCE. This is the date for the destruction of Atlantis, given by the Egyptian high priest, Synopsis of Heliopolis, and Sonchus of Sais, to the Greek sage Solon. The priests of Anu recorded that the Mediterranean area was invaded by Atlantean people about this time. Of course, these people were not from the ancient continent of Atlanta and the Atlantic Ocean, which existed more than 70,000 years earlier. These were refugees from the Minoan civilization on Crete, escaping from the volcanic eruption and tidal waves of Mount Thera that destroyed their civilization. Plato's references to Atlantis were borrowed from the writings of the Greek philosopher Solon, who was given the information by the Egyptian priest who called Atlantis Kepchu, which also happens to be the Egyptian name for the people of Crete. Some of the survivors of the Minoan volcanic disaster asked Egypt for help, since they were the only other civilization with high culture in the Mediterranean area at the time. 1351 BCE to 1337 BCE. The Domain Expeditionary Force actively waged a war of religious conquest against the Egyptian mystery cult called the Priest of Amun, also known as the Old Empire Brothers of the Serpent. During this time, the pharaoh Akhenaten abolished the priesthood of Amun and moved the capital of Egypt from Thebes to the new location at Amarna, at the exact geodetic center of Egypt. However, this plot to overthrow the Old Empire religious control was quickly spoiled. 1193 BCE. In the Near East, Achaea, the Greeks and Trojans fought for supremacy, which ended in the destruction of Troy as the finale of the Trojan War. During this same time, war was being fought out in the space of the solar system between two forces for control of the space stations surrounding Earth. That period of 300 years was a very violent resistance to the domain forces by the remnants of the old empire forces. It did not last long, however, as it is futile to resist the domain. 850 BCE. Homer, the blind Greek poet, wrote the stories, the gods, as borrowed and modified from earlier sources in the Vedic texts, Sumerian texts, Babylonian and Egyptian mythology. His poems, as well as many other myths of the ancient world, are very accurate descriptions of the exploits of Isbis on Earth, who were able to avoid the old empire amnesia operation and operate without biological bodies. 700 BCE, the Vedic hymns were first translated in the Greek language. This was the beginning of a cultural revolution in Western civilization that transformed crude and brutal tribal cultures into democratic republics based on more reasonable conduct. 638 to 559 BCE, Solon, a wise man from Greece, reported the existence of Atlantis. This was information he received from the old empire high priests Synopsis of Heliopolis and Sonchus of Sais, with whom he studied in Egypt. 630 BCE, Zoroaster created religious practices in Persia around an Isbi called Ahura Mazda. This was yet another of the growing number of monotheistic gods put in place by operatives of the domain to displace a panoply of old empire gods. 604 BCE, Lao Ji, a philosopher who wrote a small book called The Way, was an Isbi of great wisdom who overcame the effects of the old empire amnesia, hypnosis machinery, and escaped from Earth. His understanding of the nature of an Isbi must have been very good to accomplish this. According to the common legend, his last lifetime as a human was lived in a small village in China. He contemplated the existence of his own life. Like Gautama Siddhartha, he confronted his own thoughts and past lives. In doing so, he recovered some of his own memory, ability, and immortality. As an old man, he decided to leave the village and go to the forest to depart the body. The village gatekeeper stopped him and begged him to write down his personal philosophy before leaving. Here is a small piece of the advice he gave about the way he rediscovered his own spirit. He who looks will not see it. He who listens will not hear it. He who gropes will not grasp it. The formless non-entity, the motionless source of motion, the infinite essence of the spirit, is the source of life. Spirit is self. Walls form and support a room, yet the space between them is most important. A pot is formed of clay, yet the space formed therein is most useful. Action is caused by the force of nothing on something, just as the nothing of spirit is the source of all form. One suffers great afflictions because one has a body. Without a body, what afflictions could one suffer? When one cares more for the body than for his own spirit, one becomes the body and loses the way of the spirit. The self, the spirit, creates illusion. The delusion of man is that reality is not an illusion. One who creates illusions and makes them more real than reality follows the path of the spirit and finds the way of heaven.
593 BCE, the Genesis story written by the Jewish people, described angels or sons of God mating with women of earth who bore them children. These were probably renegades from the old empire. They may also have been space pirates or merchants from a system outside the galaxy who came to steal mineral resources or smuggle drugs. The domain has observed that there are many visitors to Earth from neighboring planets and galaxies, but they rarely stop and live here. What kind of beings would live on a prison planet if they were not forced to do so? The same book also reports the story of a human named Ezekiel, who witnessed the spacecraft or aircraft landing near Chebar River in Chaldea. His description of the craft uses very archaic language, technically, but is nevertheless quite an accurate description of an old empire saucer or scout craft. It is similar to the sightings of Vimanas by the people in the foothills of the Himalayas. Their Genesis story also mentions that Yahweh designed biological bodies to live for 120 years on Earth. Biological bodies on most Sun-type 12 Class 7 planets are usually engineered to last for an average of about 150 years. Human bodies on Earth last only about one-half as long. We suspect this is because the prison administrators have altered the biological material of human bodies on Earth to die more frequently so that the Isbis who inhabit them will recycle through the amnesia mechanism more frequently. It should be noted that much of the Old Testament was written during the captivity of the Jews who were enslaved in Babylon, which was very heavily controlled by priests of the Old Empire. The book introduces a false sense of time and a false concept of the origin of the creation. The serpent is the symbol of the Old Empire. It appears in the beginning of their creation story, or as the Greeks say, Genesis, and causes the spiritual destruction of the first human beings, who are metaphorically represented by Adam and Eve. The Old Testament, clearly influenced by the Old Empire forces, gives a detailed description of the Isbis being induced into biological bodies on Earth. This book also describes many of the Old Empire brainwashing activities, including the installation of false memories, lies, superstitions, commands to forget, and all manner of tricks and traps designed to keep Isbis on Earth. Most importantly, it destroys the awareness that humans are immortal spiritual beings. 580 BCE. The oracle at Delphi was one temple in a network of many oracle temples. Each temple was a communication center. The Old Empire priests designated a local god for each temple. Each of the temples in this network were located at precisely 5 degrees of latitude intervals from the capital city of Thebes throughout the Mediterranean area as far north as the Baltic Sea. The shrines served, among other things, as a grid housing electronic beacons, later called Omphalos stones. The grid arrangement of the oracle sites can only be seen from miles above the earth. The original network of electronic communications beacons were displayed when the priesthood was dispersed and were replaced by carved stones. The symbol of the Old Empire priesthood is the python, dragon, or serpent. It was called the earth dragon at Delphi, which is always represented in sculpture and vase paintings as a serpent. In Greek mythology, the guardian of the Omphalos stone at the temple at Delphi was an oracle whose name was Python the serpent. She was an Isbi, who was conquered by a god named Apollo.
He buried her under the Omphalos stone. This is a case of one god setting up his temple on the grave of another. This is a very accurate euphemism for the domain force that detected and disabled the Old Empire temple network on Earth. It was one of the fatal blows to the Old Empire force in the solar system of Earth. 559 BCE, the commanding officer of the Domain Battalion, who was lost in 5965 BCE, was detected and located by a search party sent to Earth from the Domain Expeditionary Force. He was incarnated as Cyrus II of Persia during this time. A unique system of organization was used by Cyrus II and the members of that battalion who followed him from India through his progression of human lives on Earth. In part, it enabled them to build the largest empire in the history of the Earth to that date. The Domain search party who located him traveled around the Earth searching for the lost battalion for several thousand years. The party consisted of 900 officers of the Domain, divided into teams of 300 each. One team searched the land, another team searched the oceans, and the third team searched the space surrounding Earth. There are many reports made in various human civilizations concerning their activities, which humans did not understand, of course. The Domain Search Party devised a wise variety of electronic detection devices needed to track the electronic signature or wavelength of each of the missing members of the battalion. Some were used in space, others on land, and special devices were invented to detect ISBs underwater. One of these electronic detection devices is referred to as a tree of life. The device is literally a tool designed to detect the presence of life, which is an ISB. This was a large electronic screen generator designed to permeate wide areas. To the ancient humans on Earth, it resembled a sort of tree, since it consists of an interwoven lattice of electronic field generators and receivers. The electronic field detects the presence of ISBs, whether the ISB is occupying a body or if they are outside a body. A portable version of this detection device was carried by each of the members of the Domain Search Party. Stone carvings in Sumeria showed winged beings using pine cone-shaped instruments to scan the bodies of human beings. They are also shown carrying the power unit for the scanner, which are depicted as stylized baskets or water buckets being carried by eagle-headed winged beings. Members of the aerial unit of the Domain Search Party, led by Ahura Mazda, were often called winged gods in human interpretations. Throughout the Persian civilization there are a great many stone relief carving that depict winged spacecraft that they call a Faravahar. Members of the aquatic unit of the Domain Search Party were called Ons by local humans. Stone carvings of the so-called Ons are shown wearing silver diving suits. They lived in the sea and appeared to the human population to be men dressed to look like fish. Some members of the Lost Battalion were found in the oceans inhabiting the bodies of dolphins or whales. On land, the Domain Search Party members were referred to as Anunnaki by the Sumerians and Nephilim in the Bible. Of course, their true mission and activities were never disclosed to Homo sapiens. Their activities have been purposely disguised. Therefore, the human stories and legends about the Anunnaki and the other members of the Domain Search Party have not been understood and were badly misinterpreted. In the absence of complete and accurate data, anyone observing a phenomenon will assume or hypothesize explanations in an attempt to make sense of the data. Therefore, although mythology and history may be based on factual events, they are likewise full of misunderstood and misinterpreted evaluations of the data and embellished with assumptions, theories, and hypotheses which are false. The space unit of the Domain Expeditionary Force are shown flying in a winged disc. This is an allusion to the spiritual power of the ISBs as well as to the spacecraft used by the Domain Search Party. The commander of the Lost Battalion, as Cyrus II, was an ISB who was regarded as a messiah on Earth by both the Jews and the Muslims. In less than 50 years he established a highly ethical and humanitarian philosophy which pervaded all of Western civilization. His territorial conquests, organization of people, and monumental building projects were unprecedented before or since. Such sweeping accomplishments in a short period of time could only have been achieved by a leader and a team of trained officers, pilots, engineers, and crew members of a unit of the Domain acting as a team who had been trained and worked together for thousands of years.
Although we have discovered the location of many of the ISBs in the Lost Battalion, the domain has been unable to restore their memory and return them to active duty as yet. Of course, we cannot transport ISBs who are inhabiting biological bodies to the space stations of the domain since there is no oxygen in our spacecraft. Also, we do not maintain life support facilities for biological entities there. Our only hope has been to locate and rekindle the awareness, memory, and identity of the ISBs of the Lost Battalion. One day they will be capable of rejoining us. 200 BCE. The last remnant of the old empire, pyramid civilization, is at Teotihuacan. The Aztec name means place of the gods, or where the men were transformed into gods. Like the astronomical configuration of the Giza pyramids in Egypt, the entire complex is a precise scale model of the solar system that accurately reflects the orbital distances of the inner planets, the asteroid belt, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Since the planet Uranus had only been discovered with the modern Earth telescopes in 1787, and Pluto not until 1930, it is apparent that the builders had information from other sources. A common element of the pyramid civilizations around the Earth is the constant use of the image of the snake, dragon, or serpent. This is because the beings who planted these civilizations here want to create an illusion that the gods are reptilian. This is also part of an illusion designed to perpetuate amnesia. The beings who placed false civilizations on Earth are ISBs just like you. Many of the biological bodies inhabited by ISBs in the old empire are very similar in appearance to the bodies on Earth. The gods are not reptiles, although they often behave like snakes. 1034 to 1124 AD. The entire Arab world was enslaved by one man, Hassan ibn al-Sabah, the old man of the mountain. He established the Hashashin, who operated apart Mohammedanism, which controlled by terror and fear much of India, Asia Minor, and most of the Mediterranean basin. They became a priesthood that used an extremely effective mind control mechanism, an extortion tool that enabled the assassins to control the civilized world for several hundred years. Their method was simple. Young men were kidnapped and knocked unconscious with hashish. They were taken to a garden filled with beautiful black-eyed houris, in a harem decorated with rivers of milk and honey. The young men were told that they were in paradise. They were promised they could return and live there forever if they sacrificed themselves as an assassin of whomever they were commanded to kill. The men were knocked out again and shoved out of the world to carry out the assassination mission. Meanwhile, the old man of the mountain sent a messenger to the caliph, or whatever wealthy ruler from whom they demanded a payment, demanding camel-loads of gold, spices, incense, or other valuables. If payment did not arrive on time, the assassin would be sent to kill the offending party. There was virtually no defense against the unknown assailant, who wanted nothing more than to carry out his mission, be killed, and return to heaven. This is a very crude example of how simple and effective a brainwashing and mind control operation can be when it is used skillfully and forcefully. It is a small-scale demonstration of how the amnesia mind control operation is used against the entire ISB population of Earth by the old empire. 1119 AD, the Knights Templar was established as a Christian military unit after the First Crusade, but quickly transformed into the basis for the international banking system to accumulate money to conduct the agenda of operatives for vestiges of the old empire on Earth. 1135 to 1230 AD, the Domain Expeditionary Force completed the annihilation of the remaining remnants of the old empire space fleet operating in the solar system around Earth. Unfortunately, their long-established thought control operation remains largely intact. 1307 AD, the Knights Templar was disbanded by King Philip IV of France, who was deeply in debt to the order. He pressured Pope Clement V to condemn the order's members, have them arrested, tortured them into giving false confessions, and burned them at the stake in an effort to erase his debt by seizing all of their wealth. The majority of the Templars fled to Switzerland, where they established an international banking system which secretly controls the economy of Earth. Old empire operatives act as an unseen influence on international bankers. The banks are operated covertly as an on-combatant provocateur to covertly promote and finance weapons and warfare between the nations of Earth. Warfare is an internal mechanism of control over the inmate population. The purpose of the senseless genocide and carnage of wars
financed by these international banks is to prevent the ISBs of Earth from sharing open communication, cooperate together in activities that might enable ISBs to prosper, become enlightened, and escape their imprisonment. Roswell, Alien Interview, Chapter 10, A Lesson in Biology, Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy. Personal note: my debrief was also tape recorded as a backup and to add clarification to the stenographic notes. I debriefed immediately after my interview so that everything that was said was still fresh in my mind. When I recounted these stories to the gallery stenographer, I was still reeling a bit. The perspective on Earth history from the point of view of the domain is very strange, to say the least. I wasn't sure if my uncomfortable feeling came from being disoriented or if it came from being reoriented. Either way, I felt unsteady and confused. Yet at the same time, there was a ring of truth to it. I was elated and incredulous at the same time. The stenographer looked askance at me more than a few times as she recorded the history lesson I passed on to her. I'm sure she thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe she was right. However, if my mind had been filled with hypnotic suggestions and false memories by the old empire, as Errol suggested, perhaps losing my mind would be a good idea. I didn't have much time to ponder my personal thoughts about these things at the time. It was my duty to get all the information I could from Errol and pass it on to the stenographer as soon as Errol was finished. My job was not to analyze the information, just report it as accurately as possible. The analysis would be left to the men in the gallery, or whomever else was receiving copies of the transcripts. I also delivered a list of books and materials requested by Errol to the agent in the gallery room so these could be gathered and delivered to Errol. Each night after I left Errol, she spent the rest of the night reading or scanning the materials which had been delivered to her. The members of the gallery each received a transcript of the stenographic dictation to study, each looking for information that was of interest to them. In the morning after breakfast, I reported back to the interview room to continue my interviews or lessons with Errol. Official transcript of interview, top secret, official transcript of the U.S. Army Air Force, Roswell Army Air Field, 509th Bomb Group, subject alien interview, July 28, 1947, first session. The origins of this universe and life on Earth, as discussed in the textbooks I have read, are very inaccurate. Since you serve your government as a medical personnel, your duties require that you understand biological entities, so I am sure that you will appreciate the value of the material I will share with you today. The texts of books I have been given on the subjects related to the function of life forms contain information that is based on false memories, inaccurate observation, missing data, unproven theories, and superstition. For example, just a few hundred years ago, your physicians practiced bloodletting as a means to release supposed ill humors from the body in an attempt to relieve or heal a wide variety of physical and mental afflictions. Although this has been corrected somewhat, many barbarisms are still being practiced in the name of medical science. In addition to the application of incorrect theories concerning biological engineering, many primary errors that Earth scientists make are the result of an ignorance of the nature and relative importance of ISBs as the source of energy and intelligence which animate every life form. Although it is not a priority of the domain to intervene in the affairs of Earth, the Domain Communications Office has authorized me to provide you with some information in an effort to provide more accurate and complete understanding of these things and thereby enable you to discover more effective solutions to the unique problems you face on Earth. The correct information about the origins of biological entities has been erased from your mind, as well as from the minds of your mentors. In order to help you regain your own memory, I will share with you some factual material concerning the origin of biological entities. I asked Errol if she was referring to the subject of evolution. Errol said, no, not exactly. You will find evolution mentioned in the ancient Vedic hymns. The Vedic texts are like folk tales or common wisdoms and superstitions gathered throughout the systems of the domain. These were compiled into verses like a book of rhymes. For every statement of truth, the verses contain many half-truths, reversals of truth, and fanciful imaginings blended without qualification or distinction. The theory of evolution assumes that the motivational source of energy that animates every life form
form does not exist. It assumes that an inanimate object or chemical concoction can suddenly become alive or animate accidentally or spontaneously, or perhaps an electrical discharge into a pool of chemical ooze will magically spawn a self-animated entity. There is no evidence whatsoever that this is true, simply because it's not true. Dr. Frankenstein did not really resurrect the dead into a marauding monster, except in the imagination of the Isbys, who wrote a fictitious story one dark and stormy night. No Western scientists ever stopped to consider who, what, where, when, or how this animation happens. Complete ignorance, denial, or unawareness of the spirit as the source of life force required to animate inanimate objects or cellular tissue is the sole cause of failures in Western medicine. In addition, evolution does not occur accidentally. It requires a great deal of technology, which must be manipulated under the careful supervision of Isbys. Very simple examples are seen in the modification of farm animals or in the breeding of dogs. However, the notion that human biological organisms evolved naturally from earlier ape-like forms is incorrect. No physical evidence will ever be uncovered to substantiate the notion that modern humanoid bodies evolved on this planet. The reason is simple. The idea that human bodies evolved spontaneously from the primordial ooze of chemical interactivity in the dim mists of time is nothing more than a hypnotic lie instilled in the amnesia operation to prevent your recollection of the true origins of mankind. Factually, humanoid bodies have existed in various forms throughout the universe for trillions of years. This was compounded by the fact that the Vedic hymns were brought to Earth 8,200 years ago by the Domain Expeditionary Force. While they were based in the Himalaya Mountains, the verses were taught to some of the local humans who memorized them. However, I should note that this was not an authorized activity for the crew of the Domain installation, although I am sure it seemed like an innocent diversion for them at the time. The verses were passed along verbally from one generation to the next for thousands of years in the foothills and eventually spread throughout India. No one in the domain credits any of the material in the Vedic hymns as factual material any more than you would use Grimm's fairy tales as a guide for rearing children. However, on a planet where all of the Isbys have had their memory erased, one can understand how these tales and fantasies could be taken seriously. Unfortunately, the humans who learned the Vedic verses passed them along to others, saying that they came from the gods. Eventually, the content of the verses were adopted verbatim as truth. The euphemistic and metaphorical content of the Veda were accepted and practiced as dogmatic fact. The philosophy of the verses were ignored, and the verses became the genesis of nearly every religion practiced on the planet except Hinduism. As an officer, pilot, and engineer of the domain, I must always assume a very pragmatic point of view. I could not be effective or accomplish my missions if I were to use philosophical dogma or rhetoric as my operations manual. Therefore, our discussion of history is based on actual events that occurred long before any Isbys arrived on Earth, and long before the old empire came into power. I can relate part of this history from my personal experience. Many billions of years ago, I was a member of a very large biological laboratory in a galaxy far from this one. It was called the Arcadia Regeneration Company. I was a biological engineer working with a large staff of technicians. It was our business to manufacture and supply new life forms to uninhabited planets. There were millions of star systems with millions of uninhabited planets in the region at that time. There were many other biological laboratory companies at that time also. Each of them specialized in producing different kinds of life forms depending on the class of the planet being populated. Over a long span of time, these laboratories developed a vast catalog of species throughout the galaxies. The majority of the basic genetic material is common to all species of life. Therefore, most of their work was concerned with manipulating alterations of the basic genetic pattern to produce variations of life forms that would be suitable inhabitants for various planetary classes. The Arcadia Regeneration Company specialized in mammals for forested areas and birds for tropical regions. Our marketing staff negotiated contracts with various planetary governments and independent buyers from all over the universe. The technicians created animals that were compatible with the variations in the climate, atmospheric and terrestrial density, and chemical content. In addition, they were paid to integrate our specimens with biological organisms engineered by other companies already living on a planet. In order to do this, our staff was in communication with other companies who created life forms. There were industry trade shows, publications, and a variety of other information supplied through an association that coordinated related projects. As you can imagine, our research required a great deal of interstellar travel to conduct planetary surveys. This is when I learned my skills as a pilot. The data gathered was accumulated in huge computer databases and evaluated by biological engineers. A computer is an electronic device that serves as an artificial brain or complex calculating machine. It is capable of storing information, making computations, solving problems, and performing mechanical functions. 1947. In most of the galactic systems of the universe, very large computers are commonly used to run the routine administration, mechanical services, and maintenance activities of the entire planet or planetary system. Based on the survey data gathered, designs and artistic renderings were made for new creatures. Some designs were sold to the highest bidder. Other life forms were created to meet the customized requests of our clients. The design and technical specifications were passed along an assembly line through a series of cellular, chemical, and mechanical engineers to solve the various problems. It was their job to integrate all the component factors into a workable, functional, and aesthetic finished product. Prototypes of these creatures were then produced and tested in artificially created environments. Imperfections were worked out, modifications made, and eventually a new life form was endowed or animated with a life force or spiritual energy before being introduced into the actual planetary environment for final testing. After a new life form was introduced, we monitored the interaction of these biological organisms with the planetary environment and with other indigenous life forms. Conflicts resulting from the interaction between incompatible organisms were resolved through negotiation between ourselves and other companies. The negotiations usually resulted in compromises requiring further modification to our creatures or to theirs, or both. This is a part of science or art you call eugenics. In some cases, changes were made in a planetary environment, but not often, as planet building is much more complex than making changes to an individual life form. Coincidentally, a friend and engineer with whom I used to work with at the Arcadia Regeneration Company a long time after I left the company told me that one of the projects they contracted to do in more recent times was to deliver life forms to Earth to replenish them after a war in this region of the galaxy devastated most of the life on the planets in this region of space. This would have been about 70 million years ago. The skill required to modify the planet into an ecologically interactive environment that will support billions of diverse species was an immense undertaking. Specialized consultants from nearly every biotechnology company in the galaxy were brought in to help with the project. What you now see on Earth is the huge variety of life forms left behind. Your scientists believe that the fallacious theory of evolution is an explanation for the existence of all life forms here. The truth is that all life forms on this and any other planet in this universe were created by companies like ours. How else can you explain the millions of completely divergent and unrelated species of life on land and in the oceans of this planet? How else can you explain the source of spiritual animation which defines every living creature? To say it is the work of God is far too broad. Every Isby has many names and faces in many times and places. Every Isby is a god. When they inhabit a physical object, they are the source of life. For example, there are millions of species of insects. About 350,000 of these are species of beetles. There may be as many as 100 million species of life forms on Earth at any given time. In addition, there are many times more extinct species of life on Earth than there are living life forms. Some of these will be rediscovered in the fossil or geological records of Earth. The current theory of evolution of life forms on Earth does not consider the phenomena of biological diversity. Evolution by natural selection is science fiction. One species does not accidentally or randomly evolve to become another species, as the Earth textbooks indicate, without manipulation of genetic material by an Isby. A simple example of Isby intervention is the selective breeding of a species on Earth. Within the past few hundred years, several hundred dog breeds and hundreds of varieties of pigeons and dozens of koi fish have been evolved in just a few years, beginning with one original breed. Without active intervention by Isbys, biological organisms rarely change. The The development of an animal like the duck-billed platypus required a lot of very clever engineering to combine the body of a beaver with the bill of a duck and make a mammal that lays eggs. Undoubtedly, some wealthy client placed a special order for it as a gift for some curious amusement. I'm sure that the laboratory of some biotechnical company worked on it for years to make it a self-replicating life form. The notion that the creation of any life form could have resulted from a coincidental chemical interaction moldering up from some primordial ooze is beyond absurdity. Factually, some organisms on Earth, such as proteobacteria, are modifications of a phylum designed primarily for the star Type 3 Class C planets. In other words, the domain designation for a planet with an anaerobic atmosphere nearest a large, intensely hot blue star, such as those in the constellation of Orion's belt in this galaxy. Creating life forms is very complex, highly technical work for ISBs who specialize in this field. Genetic anomalies are very baffling to Earth biologists who have had their memory erased. Unfortunately, the false memory implantations of the old empire prevent Earth scientists from observing obvious anomalies. The greatest technical challenge of biological organisms was the invention of self-generation or sexual reproduction. It was invented as the solution to the problem of having to continually manufacture replacement creatures for those that have been destroyed or eaten by other creatures. Planetary governments did not want to keep buying replacement animals. The idea was contrived trillions of years ago as a result of a conference held to resolve arguments between disputing vested interests within the biotechnology industry. The infamous Council of Yumi Krum was responsible for coordinating creature production. A compromise was reached after certain members of the council were strategically bribed or murdered to author an agreement which resulted in the biological phenomenon which we now call the food chain. The idea that a creature would need to consume the body of another life form as an energy source was offered as a solution by one of the biggest companies in the biological engineering business. They specialized in creating insects and flowering plants. The connection between the two is obvious. Nearly every flowering plant requires a symbiotic relationship with an insect in order to propagate. The reason is obvious. Both the bugs and the flowers were created by the same company. Unfortunately, the same company also had a division which created parasites and bacteria. The name of the company, roughly translated into English, would be Bugs and Blossoms. They wanted to justify the fact that the old valid purpose of the parasitic creatures they manufactured was to aid the decomposition of organic material. There was a very limited market for such creatures at that time. In order to expand their business, they hired a big public relations firm and a powerful group of political lobbyists to glorify the idea that life forms should feed from other life forms. They invented a scientific theory to use as a promotion gimmick. The theory was that all creatures needed to have food as a source of energy. Before that, none of the life forms being manufactured required any external energy. Animals did not eat other animals for food, but consumed sunlight, minerals, or vegetable matter only. Of course, Bugs and Blossoms went into the business of designing and manufacturing carnivores. Before long, so many animals were being eaten as food that the problem of replenishing them became very difficult. As a solution, Bugs and Blossoms proposed, with the help of some strategically placed bribes in high places, that other companies begin using sexual reproduction as the basis for replenishing life forms. Bugs and Blossoms was the first company to develop blueprints for sexual reproduction, of course. As expected, the patent licenses for the biological engineering process required to implant stimulus-response mating, cellular division, and pre-programmed growth patterns for self-regenerating animals were owned by Bugs and Blossoms too. Throughout the next few million years, laws were passed that required that these programs be purchased by the other biological technology companies. These were required to be imprinted into the cellular design of all existing life forms. It became a very expensive undertaking for other biotechnology companies to make such an awkward and impractical idea work. This led to the corruption and downfall of the entire industry. Ultimately, the food and sex idea completely ruined the biotechnology industry, including Bugs and Blossoms. The entire industry faded away as the market for manufactured life forms disappeared. Consequently, when a species became extinct, there is no way to replace them because the technology of creating new life forms has been lost. Obviously, none of this technology was ever known on Earth and probably never will be. There are still computer files on some planets far from here which record the procedures for biological engineering. Possibly the laboratories and computers still exist somewhere. However, there is no one around doing anything with them. Therefore, you can understand why it is so important for the domain to protect the dwindling number of creatures left on Earth.
The core concept behind sexual reproduction technology was the invention of a chemical-electronic interaction called cyclical stimulus response generators. This is a programmed genetic mechanism which causes a seemingly spontaneous recurring impulse to reproduce. The same technique was later adapted and applied to biological flesh bodies, including Homo sapiens. Another important mechanism used in the reproductive process, especially with Homo sapien-type bodies, is the implantation of a chemical electrical trigger mechanism in the body. The trigger which attracts ISBs to inhabit a human body, or any kind of flesh body, is the use of an artificially imprinted electronic wave which uses aesthetic pain to attract the ISB. Every trap in the universe, including those used to capture ISBs who remain free, is baited with an aesthetic electronic wave. The sensations caused by the aesthetic wavelength are more attractive to an ISB than any other sensation. When the electronic waves of pain and beauty are combined together, this causes the ISB to get stuck in the body. The reproductive trigger for lesser life forms, such as cattle and other animals, is triggered by chemicals emitted from scent glands. The scent glands, combined with reproductive chemical electrical impulses stimulated by testosterone or estrogen. These are also interactive with nutrition levels, which cause the life form to reproduce more when deprived of food sources. Starvation promoted reproductive activity as a means of perpetuating survival through future generations when the current organism fails to survive. These fundamental principles have been applied throughout all species of life. The debilitating impact and addiction to the sexual aesthetic pain electronic wave is the reason that the ruling class of the domain do not inhabit flesh bodies. This is also why officers of the domain forces only use doll bodies. This wave has proven to be the most effective trapping device ever created in the history of the universe as far as I know. The civilizations of the domain and the old empire both depend on this device to recruit and maintain a workforce of ISBs who inhabit flesh bodies on planets and installations. These ISBs are the working class beings who do all the slavish, manual, undesirable work on planets. As I mentioned, there is a very highly regimented and fixed hierarchy or class system for all ISBs throughout the old empire and the domain as follows. The highest class are free ISBs, that is, they are not restricted to the use of any type of body and may come and go at will, provided that they do not destroy or interfere with the social, economic, or political structure. Below this class are many strata of limited ISBs who may or may not use a body from time to time. Limitations are imposed on each ISB regarding range of power, ability, and mobility they can exercise. Below these are doll body class, to which I belong. Nearly all space officers and crew members of spacecraft are required to travel through intergalactic space. Therefore, they are each equipped with a body manufactured from lightweight, durable materials. Various body types have been designed to facilitate specialized functions. Some bodies have accessibility such as interchangeable tools or apparatus for activities such as maintenance, mining, chemical management, navigation, and so forth. There are many graduations of this body type, which also serve as an insignia of rank. Below these are the soldier class. The soldiers are equipped with a myriad of weapons and specialized armaments designed to detect, combat, and overwhelm any imaginable foe. Some soldiers are issued mechanical bodies. Most soldiers are merely remote-controlled robots with no class designation. The lower classes are limited to flesh bodies. Of course, it is not possible for these to travel through space for obvious reasons. Fundamentally, flesh bodies are far too fragile to endure the stresses of gravity, temperature extremes, radiation exposure, atmospheric chemicals, and the vacuum of space. There are also the obvious logistical inconveniences of food, defecation, sleep, atmospheric elements, and air pressure required by flesh bodies that doll bodies do not require. Most flesh bodies will suffocate in only a few minutes without a specific combination of atmospheric chemicals. After 2 or 3 days, the bacteria which live internally and externally on the body cause severe odors to be emitted. Odors of any kind are not acceptable in a space vessel. Flesh can tolerate only a very limited spectrum of temperatures, whereas in space the contrast of temperatures may vary hundreds of degrees within seconds. Of course, flesh bodies are utterly useless for military duty. A single shot from a handheld electronic blast gun instantly turns a flesh body into a noxious vapor cloud. ISBs who inhabit flesh bodies have lost much of their native ability and power. Although it is theoretically possible to regain or rehabilitate these abilities, no practical means has been discovered or authorized by the domain. Even though spacecraft of the domain travel trillions of light years in a single day, the time required to traverse the space between galaxies is significant, not to mention the length of time to complete just one set of mission orders, which may require thousands of years. Biological flesh bodies live for only a very short time, only 60 to 150 years at most, whereas doll bodies can be reused and repaired almost indefinitely. The first development of biological bodies began in this universe about 74 trillion years ago. It rapidly became a fad for ISBs to create and inhabit various types of bodies for an assortment of nefarious reasons. Especially for amusement, this is to experience various physical sensations vicariously through the body. Since that time there has been a continuing de-evolution in the relationship of ISBs to bodies. As ISBs continue to play around with these bodies, certain tricks were introduced to cause ISBs to get trapped inside a body so they were unable to leave again. This was done primarily by making bodies that appeared sturdy but were actually very fragile. An ISB, using their natural power to create energy, accidentally injured a body when contacting it. The ISB was remorseful about having injured this fragile body. The next time they encountered a body, they began to be careful with them. In so doing, the ISB would withdraw or minimize their own power so as not to injure the body. A very long and treacherous history of this kind of trickery, combined with similar misadventures, eventually resulted in a large number of ISBs becoming permanently trapped in bodies. Of course, this became a profitable enterprise for some ISBs, who took advantage of the situation to make slaves of others. The resulting enslavement progressed over trillions of years and continues today. Ultimately, the dwindling ability of ISBs to maintain a personal state of operational freedom and ability to create energy resulted in the vast and carefully guarded hierarchy or class system. Using bodies as a symbol of each class is used throughout the old empire as well as the domain. The vast majority of ISBs throughout the galaxies of this universe inhabit some form of flesh body. The structure, appearance, operation, and habitat of these bodies vary according to the gravity, atmosphere, and climatic conditions of the planet they inhabit. Body types are predetermined largely by the type and size of the star around which the planet revolves, the distance from the star, the geological as well as the atmospheric components of the planet. On the average, these stars and planets fall into gradients of classification, which are fairly standard throughout the universe. For example, Earth is identified roughly as a Sun Type 12 Class 7 planet. This is a heavy gravity, nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere planet with biological life forms in proximity to a single yellow, medium-sized, low-radiation sun or Type 12 star. The proper designations are difficult to translate accurately due to the extreme limitations of astronomical nomenclature in the English language. There are as many varieties of life forms as there are grains of sand on the beach. You can imagine how many different creatures and types of bodies have been manufactured by millions of companies such as bugs and blossoms for all the myriad planetary systems during the course of 74 trillion years. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, personal note. When Errol finished telling me this story, there was a long, silent pause while I muddled through all this in my mind. Had Errol been reading science fiction books and fantasy stories during the night? Why would she tell me something so incredibly far-fetched? If there had not been a 40-inch tall alien with gray skin and 3 fingers on each hand and foot sitting directly across from me, I would not have believed a single word of it. In retrospect, over the 60 years since Errol gave me this information, Earth doctors have begun to develop some of the biological engineering technology that Errol told me about right here on Earth. Heart bypasses, cloning, test tube babies, organ transplants, plastic surgery, genes, chromosomes, and so on. One thing is for sure, I have never looked at a bug or flower in the same way since then, not to mention my religious belief in Genesis. Roswell Alien Interview, Chapter 11, A Lesson in Science. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, personal note. The transcript of this interview is verbatim. There is nothing more I can add to it. It says everything. Official transcript of interview, top secret. Official transcript of the U.S. Army Air Force, Roswell Army Air Field, 509th Bomb Group. Subject, Alien Interview, July 29th, 1947, first session. Today, Errol told me some very technical things. I took a few notes to remind myself so I can repeat what she said as closely as possible. She began with an analogy about scientific knowledge. Can you imagine how much progress could have been made on Earth if people like Johannes Gutenberg, Sir Isaac Newton, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington Carver, Nikola Tesla, Jonas Salk,
and Richard Trevithick, and many thousands of similar geniuses and inventors were living today. Imagine what technical accomplishments might have been developed if men like these never died. What if they were never given amnesia and made to forget everything they knew? What if they continued to learn and work forever? What level of technology and civilization could be attained if immortal spiritual beings like these were allowed to continue to create in the same place at the same time for billions or trillions of years? Essentially, the domain is one civilization that has existed for trillions of years with relatively uninterrupted progress. Knowledge has been accumulated, refined, and improved upon in nearly every field of study imaginable and beyond imagining. Originally, the interaction of ISB illusions or inventions created the very fabric of the physical universe, the microcosm and the macrocosm. Originally, the interaction of ISB illusions or inventions created the very fabric of the physical universe, the microcosm and the macrocosm. Every single particle of the universe has been imagined and brought into existence by an ISB. Everything created from an idea, a thought, with no weight or size or location in space. Every speck of dust in space, from the size of the tiniest subatomic particle to the size of a sun or Magellantic cloud, the size of many galaxies, was created from the nothingness of a thought. Even the tiniest individual cells were contrived and coordinated to enable a microbial entity to sense and navigate through infinitesimally small spaces. These also came from an idea thought up by an ISB. You and every ISB on Earth have participated in the creation of this universe, even though you are now confined to a fragile body made of flesh. You live only 65 short rotations of your planet around a star. You have been given overwhelming electric shock treatments to wipe out your memory. You must learn everything all over again each lifetime in spite of all these circumstances. You are who you are and will always be, and deep down you still know that you are and what you know. You are still the essence of you. How else could anyone understand the child prodigy? An ISB who plays concertos on a piano at 3 years of age without formal training? Impossible if they do not simply remember what they have already learned from thousands of lives spent in front of a keyboard in times untold or on planets far away. They may not know how they know, they just know. Humankind has developed more technology in the past 100 years than in the past 2,000 years. Why? The answer is simple. The influence of the old empire over the mind and over the affairs of mankind has been diminished by the domain. A renaissance of invention of Earth began in 1250 AD with the destruction of the old Empire's space fleet in the solar system. During the next 500 years, Earth may have the potential to regain autonomy and independence, but only to the degree that humankind can apply the concentrated genius of the ISBs on Earth to solve the amnesia problem. However, on a cautionary note, the inventive potential of the ISBs who have been exiled to this planet is severely compromised by the criminal elements of the Earth population, specifically politicians, warmongers, and irresponsible physicists who create unlimited weapons such as nuclear bombs, chemicals, disease, and social chaos. These have the potential to extinguish all life forms on Earth forever. Even the relatively small explosions that were tested and used in the past 2 years on Earth have the potential to destroy all life, if deployed in sufficient quantity. Larger weapons could consume all the oxygen in the global atmosphere in a single explosion. Therefore, the most fundamental problems that must be solved in order to ensure that Earth will not be destroyed by technology are social and humanitarian problems. The greatest scientific minds of Earth, in spite of mathematical or mechanical genius, have never addressed these problems. Therefore, do not look to scientists to save Earth or the future of humanity. Any so-called science that is solely based on the paradigm that existence is composed of energy and objects moving through space is not a science. Such beings utterly ignore the creative spark originated by an individual ISB and collective work of the ISBs who continually create physical universe and all universes. Every science will remain relatively ineffective or destructive to the degree that it omits or devaluates the relative importance of the spiritual spark that ignites all creation and life. Unfortunately, this ignorance has been carefully and forcefully instilled in human beings by the old empire to ensure that ISBs on this planet will not be able to recover their innate ability to create space, energy, matter, and time, or any other component part of universes. As long as awareness of the immortal, powerful, spiritual self is ignored, humanity will remain imprisoned until the day of its own self-destruction and oblivion. Do not rely on the dogma of physical sciences to master the fundamental forces of creation any more than you would trust the chanted incantations of an incense-burning shaman. The next result of both of these is entrapment and oblivion. Scientists pretend to observe, but they only suppose what they see and call it fact. Like the blind man, a scientist cannot learn to see until he realizes that he's blind. The facts of earth science do not include the source of creation. They include only the result or byproducts of creation. The facts of science do not include any memory of the nearly infinite past experience of existence. The essence of creation and existence cannot be found through the lens of a microscope or telescope or by any other measurement of the physical universe. One cannot comprehend the perfume of a flower or the pain felt by an abandoned lover with meters and calipers. Everything you will ever know about the creative force and ability of a God can be found within you, an immortal spiritual being. How can a blind man teach others to see the nearly infinite gradients that comprise the spectrum of light? The notion that one can understand the universe without understanding the nature of an Isby is as absurd as conceiving that an artist is a speck of paint on his own canvas, or that the lace on a ballet shoe is the choreographer's vision, or the grace of a dancer, or the electric excitement of opening night. Study of the spirit has been booby-trapped by the thought control operation through religious superstitions they instill in the minds of men. Conversely, the study of the spirit and the mind have been prohibited by science, which eliminates anything that is not measurable in the physical universe. Science is the religion of matter. It worships matter. The paradigm of science is that creation is all and the creator is nothing. Religion says the creator is all and the creation is nothing. These two extremes are the bars of a prison cell. They prevent observation of all phenomenon as an interactive whole. Study of creation without knowing the Isby, the source of creation, is futile. When you sail to the edge of a universe conceived by science, you fall off the end into an abyss of dark, dispassionate space and lifeless, unrelenting force. On earth you have been convinced that the oceans of the mind and spirit are filled with gruesome, ghoulish monsters that will eat you alive if you dare to venture beyond the breakwater of superstition. The vested interest of the old empire prison system is to prevent you from looking at your own soul. They fear that you will see in your own memory the slave masters who kept you imprisoned. The prison is made of shadows in your mind. The shadows are made of lies and pain and loss and fear. The true geniuses of civilization are those Isbys who will enable other Isbys to recover their memory and regain self-realization and self-determination. This issue is not solved through enforcing moral regulation on behavior, or through the control of beings through mystery, faith, drugs, guns, or other dogma of a slave society, and certainly not through the use of electric shock and hypnotic commands. The survival of Earth and every being on it depends on the ability to recover the memory of skills you have accrued through the trilenia, to recover the essence of yourself. Such an art, science, or technology has never been conceived in the old empire. Otherwise, they would not have restored to the solution that brought you to your current conditions on Earth. Neither has such technology ever been developed by the domain. Until recently, the necessity of rehabilitating an Isby with amnesia has not been needed. Therefore, no one has ever worked on solving this problem. So far, unfortunately, the domain has no solution to offer. A few officers of the Domain Expeditionary Force have taken it upon themselves to provide technology to Earth during their off-duty time. These officers leave their doll at the space station and as an Isby assume or take over a biological body on Earth. In some cases, an officer can remain on duty while they inhabit and control other bodies at the same time. This is a very dangerous and adventurous undertaking. It requires a very able Isby to accomplish such a mission and return to the base successfully. One officer who did this recently while continuing to attend his official duties was known on Earth as the electronics inventor Nikola Tesla. It is my intention, although is not a part of my mission orders, to assist you in your efforts to advance scientific and humanitarian progress on Earth. My intention is to help other Isbys to help themselves. In order to solve the amnesia problem on Earth, you will need much more advanced technology. as well as social stability to allow enough time for research, and need much more advanced technology as well as social stability to allow enough time for research and development of techniques to free the ISB from the body and to free the mind of the ISB from amnesia. Although the domain has a long-term interest in maintaining Earth as a useful planet, it has no particular interest in the human population of Earth other than its own personnel here. We are interested in preventing the destruction as well as accelerating the development of technologies that will sustain the infrastructures of the global biosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere. To this end, you will discover on very careful and thorough examination that my spacecraft contains a wide assortment of technology that does not exist on your Earth. If you distribute pieces of this craft to various scientists for study, they will be able to reverse engineer some of the technology to the extent that Earth has the raw materials required to replicate these components. Some features will be indecipherable. Other features cannot be duplicated as Earth does not have the natural resources required to replicate them. This is especially true of the metals used to construct the craft. Not only do these metals not exist on Earth, the refining process required to produce these metals took billions of years to develop. It is also true of the navigation system, which requires an ISB whose own personal wavelength has been specifically attuned to the neural network of the craft. The pilot of the craft must possess a very high order of energy, volition, discipline, training, and intelligence to manipulate such a craft. ISBs on Earth are incapable of this expertise because it requires the use of an artificial body specifically created for this purpose. Certain individual Earth scientists, some of whom are among the most brilliant minds in the history of the universe, will have their memory of this technology jogged when they examine the craft components, just as some of the scientists and physicists on Earth have been able to remember how to recreate electronic generators, internal combustion, and steam locomotion, refrigeration, aircraft, antibiotics, and other tools of your civilization. They will also rediscover other vital technology in my craft. The following are the specific systems embodied in my craft that contain useful components. There is an assortment of microscopic wiring or fibers within the walls of the craft that control such things as communications, information storage, computer function, and automatic navigation. The same wiring is used for light, sublight, and ultralight spectrum detection and vision. The fabrics of the interior of the craft are far superior to any on Earth at this time and have hundreds of thousands of applications. You will also find mechanisms for creating, amplifying, and channeling light particles or waves as a form of energy. As an officer, pilot, and engineer of the domain forces, I am not at liberty to discuss or convey the detailed operation or construction of the craft in any way other than what I have just disclosed. However, I am confident that there are many competent engineers on Earth who will develop useful technology with these resources. I am providing these details to you in the hope that the greater good of the domain will be served.
Roswell, Alien Interview, Chapter 12, A Lesson in Immortality. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, personal note. I think the following transcript is pretty much self-explanatory. Official transcript of interview, top secret. Official transcript of the U.S. Army Air Force, Roswell Army Air Field, 509th Bomb Group. Subject, Alien Interview, July 30th, 1947, first session. Immortal spiritual beings, which I refer to as ISBs for the sake of convenience, are the source and creators of illusions. Each one individually and collectively, in their original unfettered state of being, are an eternal, all-powerful, all-knowing entity. ISBs create space by imagining a location. The intervening distance between themselves and the imagined location is what we call space. An ISB can perceive the space and objects created by other ISBs. ISBs are not physical universe entities. They are a source of energy and illusion. ISBs are not located in space or time, but can create space, place particles in space, create energy, and shape particles into various forms, cause the motion of forms, and animate forms. Any form which is animated by an ISB is called life. An ISB can decide to agree that they are located in space or time, and that they themselves are an object, or any other manner of illusion created by themselves or another or other ISBs. The disadvantages of creating an illusion is that an illusion must be continually created. If not continually created, it disappears. Continual creation of an illusion requires incessant attention to every detail of the illusion in order to sustain it. A common denominator of ISBs seems to be the desire to avoid boredom. A spirit only, without interaction with other ISBs, and the unpredictable motion, drama, and unanticipated intentions and illusions being created by other ISBs, is easily bored. What if you could imagine anything, perceive everything, and cause anything to happen at will? What if you couldn't do anything else? What if you always knew the outcome of every game and the answer to every question? Would you get bored? The entire backtime track of ISBs is immeasurable, nearly infinite, in terms of physical universe time. There is no measurable beginning or end for an ISB. They simply exist in an everlasting now. Another common denominator of ISBs is that admiration of one's own illusions by others is very desirable. If the desired admiration is not forthcoming, the ISB will keep creating the illusion in an attempt to get admiration. One could say that the entire physical universe is made of unadmired illusions. The origins of this universe began with the creation of individual illusionary spaces. These were the home of the ISBs. Sometimes a universe is a collaborative creation of illusions by two or more ISBs. A proliferation of ISBs in the universe they create sometimes collide or become commingled or merge to an extent that many ISBs shared in the co-creation of a universe. ISBs diminish their ability in order to have a game to play. ISBs think that any game is better than no game. They will endure pain, suffering, stupidity, privation, and all manner of unnecessary and undesirable conditions just to play a game. Pretending that one does not know all, see all, and cause all is a way to create the conditions necessary for playing a game. Unknowns, freedoms, barriers, and/or opponents and goals. Ultimately, playing a game solves the problem of boredom. In this fashion, all the space, galaxy, suns, planets, and physical phenomena of this universe, including life forms, places, and events that have been created by ISBs and sustained by mutual agreement that these things exist. There are as many universes as there are ISBs to imagine, build, and perceive them, each existing concurrently with its own continuum. Each universe is created using its own unique set of rules as imagined, altered, preserved, or destroyed by one or more ISBs who created it. Time, energy, objects, and space, as defined in terms of the physical universe, may or may not exist in other universes. The domain exists in such a universe as well as in the physical universe. One of the rules of the physical universe is that energy can be created but not destroyed. So the universe will keep expanding as long as ISBs keep adding more new energy to it. It's nearly infinite. It is like an automobile assembly line that never stops running, and none of the cars are ever destroyed. Every ISB is basically good, therefore an ISB does not enjoy doing things to other ISBs which they themselves do not want to experience. For an ISB, there is no inherent standard for what is good or bad, right or wrong, ugly or beautiful. These ideas are all based on the opinion of each individual ISB. The closest concept that human beings have to describe an ISB is as a god, all-knowing, all-powerful, infinite. So how does a god stop being a god? They pretend not to know. How can you play a game of hide-and-seek if you always know where the other person is hiding? You pretend not to know where the other players are hiding, so you can go off and seek them. This is how games are created. You have forgotten that you are just pretending. In so doing, ISBs become entrapped and enslaved inside a maze of their own devising. How does one create a cage, lock one's own self inside the cage, throw away the key, and forget there is a key or cage, and forget there is an inside or outside, and even forget that there is a self? Create the illusion that there is no illusion, the entire universe is real, and that no other universe exists or can be created. On Earth, the propaganda taught and agreed upon is that the gods are responsible and that human beings are not responsible. You are taught that only God can create universes, so the responsibility for every action is assigned to another ISB or God, never oneself. No human being ever assumes personal responsibility for the fact that they themselves, individually and collectively, are gods. This fact alone is the source of entrapment for every ISB. Roswell, Alien Interview, Chapter 13, A Lesson in the Future. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy, personal note. I think this transcript speaks for itself also. I relayed Errol's exact communication as faithfully as possible. My superior officers became very alarmed about the possible military implications of what Errol said in this interview. Official transcript of interview, top secret. Official transcript of the U.S. Army Air Force. Roswell Army Air Field, 509th Bomb Group. Subject, Alien Interview, July 31st, 1947, first session. It is my personal belief that the truth should not be sacrificed on the altar of political, religious, or economic expediency. As an officer, pilot, and engineer of the domain, it is my duty to protect the greater good of the domain and its possessions. However, we cannot defend ourselves against forces of which we are not aware. The isolation of Earth from the rest of civilization prevents me from discussing many subjects with you at this time. Security and protocol prevent me from revealing any but the broadest general statements about the plans and activities of the domain. However, I can give you some information that you might find useful. I must return to my assigned duties on the space station now. I have provided as much help as I feel ethically able to offer, given the requirements and constraints of my duties as an officer, pilot, and engineer of the domain forces. Therefore, I will depart as an ISB from Earth within the next 24 hours. Editor's note. The following several paragraphs appear to be personal comments made by Matilda to the stenographer regarding her interview with Errol. What this means is that Errol will leave her doll with us, as her craft is damaged beyond repair. We can examine, dissect, and study the body at our leisure. She does not have any further use for it, nor does she have any personal feelings or attachments to it, as others are readily available for her to use. Errol does not recommend that there are any technology in the body that Earth scientists will find useful, however. The technology of the body is simple, yet vastly beyond the reckoning of our current ability to analyze or reverse engineer any facet of it. The body is neither biological or mechanical, but a unique fabrication of materials and ancient technologies not found on any Earth-type planet. As Errol mentioned previously, a very rigid and distinctive hierarchy of social, economic, and cultural classes exists throughout the domain, which has remained unvaried and inviolate for many millennia. The body type and function assigned to an ISB officer varies specifically according to the rank, class, longevity, training level, command level, service record, and meritorious citations earned by each individual ISB, as with any other military insignia. The body used by Errol is specifically designed for an officer, pilot, and engineer of her rank and class. The bodies of her companions, which were destroyed in the crash, were not the same rank or class, but of a junior rank. Therefore, the appearance, features, composition, and functionality of those bodies were specialized and limited to the requirements of their duties. The junior officers whose bodies were damaged in the crash have left their bodies and returned to their duties in the space station. The damage suffered by their bodies was due primarily to the fact that they were officers of lower rank. They used bodies which were partially biological and therefore far less durable and resilient than hers. Editor's note, at this point the transcript appears to resume with statements made by Errol. Although the domain will not hesitate to destroy any active vestiges of the old Empire operations wherever they are discovered, this is not our primary mission in this galaxy. I'm sure that the old Empire mind control mechanisms can be deactivated and destroyed eventually. However, it is not possible to estimate how long this may take, as we do not understand the extent of this operation at this time. We do know that the old Empire force screen is vast enough to cover this end of the galaxy at least. We also know from experience that each force generator and trapping device is very difficult to detect, locate, and destroy. Also, it is not the current mission of the Domain Expeditionary Force to commit resources to this endeavor. The eventual destruction of these devices may make it possible for your memory to be restored simply by virtue of not having it erased after each lifetime. Fortunately, the memory of an ISB cannot be permanently erased. There are many other active space civilizations who maintain various nefarious operations in this area, not the least of which is dumping unwanted ISBs on Earth. None of these craft are hostile or in violent opposition to the domain forces. They know better than to challenge us. For the most part, the domain ignores Earth and its inhabitants, except to ensure that the resources of the planet itself are not permanently spoiled. This sector of the galaxy was annexed by the domain and is the possession of the domain to do with or dispose of it as deems best.
the moon of Earth, and the asteroid belt have become a permanent base of operations for the domain forces. Needless to say, any attempt by humans or others to interfere in the activities of the domain in this solar system, even if it were possible, which it definitely is not, will be terminated swiftly. This is not a serious concern, as I mentioned earlier, since Homo sapiens cannot operate in open space. Of course, we will continue with the next steps of the domain expansion plan, which has remained on schedule for billions of years. Over the next 5,000 years, there will be increasing traffic and activity of the domain forces as we progress toward the center of this galaxy and beyond to spread our civilization through the universe. If humanity is to survive, it must cooperate to find effective solutions to the difficult conditions of your existence on Earth. Humanity must rise above its human form and discover where they are and that they are Isbis, and who they really are as Isbis in order to transcend the notion that they are merely biological bodies. Once these realizations have been made, it may be possible to escape your current imprisonment. Otherwise, there will be no future for the Isbis on Earth. Although there are no active battles or wars being waged between the domain and the Old Empire, there still exists the covert actions of the Old Empire taken against Earth through their thought control operation. When one knows that these activities exist, the effects can be observed clearly. The most obvious examples of these actions against the human race can be seen as incidents of sudden, inexplicable behavior. A very recent instance of this occurred in the United States military just before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Just 3 days before the attack, someone in authority ordered all the ships in Pearl Harbor to go into port and secure for inspection. The ships were ordered to take all the ammunition out of their magazines and store it below. On the afternoon before the attack, all of the admirals and generals were attending parties, even though 2 Japanese aircraft carriers were discovered standing right off Pearl Harbor. The obvious action to take would have been to contact Pearl Harbor by telephone to warn them of the danger of a fight starting and to put the ammunition back and order the ships to get out of port into the open sea. About 6 hours before the Japanese attack began, a U.S. Navy ship sank a small Japanese submarine right outside the harbor. Instead of contacting Pearl Harbor by telephone to report the incident, a warning message was put into top-secret code, which took about 2 hours to encode. Then it took another 2 hours to decode. The word of warning to Pearl Harbor did not arrive until 10 a.m. Pearl Harbor time, Sunday, 2 hours after the Japanese attack destroyed the U.S. fleet. How do things like this happen? If the men who were responsible for these obviously disastrous errors were stood up and asked bluntly to justify their actions and intentions, we would find out that they were quite sincere in their jobs. Ordinarily, they do the very best they can do for people and nations. However, all of a sudden, from some completely unknown and undetectable source, enters these wild, unexplainable situations that just can't exist. The Old Empire thought control operation is run by a small group of old baboons with very small minds. They are playing insidious games with no purpose and no goal other than to control and destroy Isbis who could otherwise manage themselves perfectly well if left alone. These types of artificially created incidents are being forced upon the human race by the operations of the mind-controlled prison system. The prison guards will always promote and support oppressive and totalitarian activities of Isbis on Earth. Why not keep the inmates fighting between themselves? Why not empower madmen to run the governments of Earth? The men who run the criminal governments of Earth mirror the commands given them by covert thought controllers of the Old Empire. The human race will continue to shadowbox with this for a long time, as long as it remains the human race. Until then, the Isbis on Earth will continue to live a series of consecutive lives over and over and over. The same Isbi who lived during the rise and fall of civilizations in India, China, Mesopotamia, Greece, and Rome are inhabiting bodies in the present time in America, France, Russia, Africa, and around the world. In between each lifetime, an Isbi is sent back again to begin all over, as though the new life was the only life they had ever lived. They begin anew in pain, in misery, and mystery. Some Isbis have been transported to Earth more recently than others. Some Isbis have been on Earth only a few hundred years, so they have no personal experience with the earlier civilizations of Earth. They have no experiences of having lived on Earth, so could not remember a previous existence here, even if their memory was restored. They might, however, remember lives they lived elsewhere, on other planets, and in other times. Others have been here since the first days of Lemuria. In any case, the Isbis of Earth are here forever until they can break the amnesia cycle, conquer the electronic traps set up by their captors, and free themselves.
Because the domain has 3,000 of their own ISBs in captivity on Earth also, they have an interest in solving this problem. This problem has never been encountered or effectively solved before in the universe as far as they know. They will continue their efforts to free those ISBs from Earth where and when it is possible, but it will require time to develop an unprecedented technology and the diligence to do so. Editor's note: the following statement is a comment by Matilda. I think that it is Errol's sincere desire, as one ISB to another, that the rest of our eternity will be as pleasant as possible.